Okay, everybody, so here's some information as you're preparing for your final exam. Some general advice, especially when you're preparing for an exam that includes a cumulative portion, is to study smart. So take a look at that study guide and really hone in on the things I'm asking you to study. Know that you don't have to know everything, but you do need to know the things that I'm asking you about specifically. So don't cast a broad net where you're reviewing everything and rereading the entire book and looking through all of your notes. Focus in on the stuff I'm asking you to remember from this semester that I want you to walk away from knowing and in anticipation of applying that knowledge next semester. It's always a great idea to come up with examples, to visualize a particular research design by thinking through one of your own, to take a look at a notation system and then think through a study that would fill that particular notation system, to tell a story. All of those are great examples of ways that make it more concrete and that help solidify it in your brain. Also, just keep in mind that open book, open note can be a bit of a trap. You want to make sure to study enough so that you don't really have to look things up and then kind of spin your wheels trying to look everything up. That's going to be an ineffective use of your time. Especially for slightly longer exams that take longer to take and that are just longer in general, it's a good idea, because it is on a computer, to have a piece of scrap paper that you can write things down on as you go, so that you can come back to a certain question and kind of remind yourself, oh, I need to look this up, or oh, I need to revisit this question. My answer probably wasn't the best. And it's important to read each question thoroughly and all the answers before you answer. When it comes to new content, it shouldn't necessarily be too surprising here. The notation system should be fairly straightforward to everybody by now. So the number of variables, the number of independent variables, and the number of levels of each, whether they're between, within, or mixed. So hopefully that makes sense to you in terms of the notation system. And in addition, we talked about quasi-experimental designs. So if you know the experimental designs, the pre-test, post-test control group design, the post-test only control group design, and so on and so forth, this is just a version of that that has some twists. So it might just have a single group. It might have non-equivalent groups that haven't been randomly assigned. And so just start with the experimental design and then take a look at how the quasi-experimental design differs so that you can see what has changed and use that to kind of help solidify these concepts. The rest of these are fairly straightforward, hopefully, when it comes to very specific things I want you to be able to define and recognize. Hopefully, you'll be able to get into a certain mode where when I talk about interrupted time series design versus control series design, you won't necessarily mistake it for something else like an ABA design. So just kind of make sure that those are very clearly distinguished for you so that you can know what I'm asking about at any given time and how it relates to the content that we've covered. When it comes to cumulative content, you might notice that this starts with information that we learned toward the very beginning of the semester, and it has some things that should hopefully be revisiting familiar material. So things like how quasi-experimental designs differ from experimental designs is something that I expect you to be able to know. I want you to understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative approaches. We went through a little bit of an activity around reliability in terms of Chromebox Alpha, so hopefully that should be fairly familiar to you, but kind of revisiting that, revisiting observational methods. All of those different types of designs and definitions are things that I expect you to be able to know. So once again, coming up with flashcards is going to be helpful, and coming up with examples is going to be helpful. You might come up with a Kahoot and play it with your classmates in a review session. Here's some additional cumulative content. Once again, external validity is the ability to generalize, and internal validity is the ability to determine causation. So keep in mind there are very specific threats to internal validity. And then, of course, we have the experimental designs, and then specific issues of bias and ethics. So hopefully these topics should help you focus in on what you need to pay attention to for your final exam and kind of narrow your focus a little and make it easier for you to focus in on the things I really want you to leave this semester knowing. As you're going through this, if you have any questions about any of these things, you can of course feel free to write me an email. And I cannot recommend enough working with your fellow classmates to help review. So on Tuesday, get together a study session and poke at these things a little bit, come up with contests for designing examples of these different things. Just kind of see if you can relate it and communicate with one another about these concepts. And let me know if you have any questions. Oh, there's Sansa saying goodbye.